New year, same extra value meals at McDonald's. So now get 2 snack wraps, plus fries, and a medium soft drink for just $8.
For limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher in Hawaii, Alaska, and California, and for delivery.
Imagine that this line represents time. Present 1985. Future. Past. Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate to you, me, and Einstein. Fuck. Reality for everyone else.
Time travel, the John Titor mystery. In the 2030s, the new American Army developed the technology required for world line traveling, a concept that many people would misconceive as time traveling, but was not just a simple movement through time. Rather, the technology relied on literally moving to a point in other world lines or parallel worlds, where a specific task could be completed in regards to a particular mission. In an attempt to rebuild the once great nation that was devastated in 2015 by nuclear missile attacks by our adversaries in Russia, the US military began using said technology to send specifically trained soldiers to go back to specific times in other world lines to retrieve specific items of technology needed to rebuild and prevent a further decline of the American civilization, as well as reinvent technological capabilities that were lost to World War III. One particular person sent back was a man whose target was an IBM 5100 personal computer in the year 1975. Why such a computer? Wouldn't something from the mid-1970s be completely obsolete for anything possibly needed in the future? Most would believe that the answer would be a yes. But this particular piece of ancient tech held a specific capability that was exactly what the future would need to correct a critical issue ready to come to fruition in the year 2038, a mere 2 years after the mission takes place. The issue lies in the Linux command system of 32-bit computers, which are the only ones usable after the effects of nuclear EMPs that left modern technology as useless relics. This man was chosen due to his relationship to a specific IBM engineer that just so happened to be his own grandfather, who ultimately would give our time traveler one of the first ever personal computers that he was searching for. In the year 1998, a small family in an unknown area of Florida were shocked to meet a man at their front door who claimed to be their son from the future. The family, which consisted of a husband, wife, and their newborn, would eventually become convinced that the man was who he claimed he was and allowed him to stay with them for 3 years. This strange 30-something-year-old version of their then newborn son came with a warning. Quote, Y2K was going to cripple society, and he was here as a promise to the husband's father to help them through this troubling time to ensure their survival into the post-technological world. As we all know, Y2K brought no critical changes to our lives and passed with ease. This bothered the man greatly as he planned his trip back to a world line that closely resembled his original one. His thoughts and concerns were that he may have changed the future and worried about his family. But with a greater understanding of timelines, world lines, paradoxical consequences, and quantum physics, he would set out to warn the world of the grave future that they faced and what he believed was only postponed but yet very inevitable. The man would begin posting to chat rooms and message boards to share his knowledge and possibly help a few people prepare without giving them too much information as to completely alter the world line to a completely foreign outcome. The first post appeared in October of 2000 by his username, timetravel_0. Quote, my name is John, I'm 38, and a time traveler from Florida. These chat room conversations would eventually go down in history as the possible proof that time travel really exists, and that this particular man was the real deal. From the time he arrived in 1998 after his trip to 1975, he sat and waited for a window to a comparable world line to his original to come about. In early 2001, that window opened, and he left us for good. And his family moved to Nebraska to escape the upcoming nuclear war, Second American Civil War, and the fall of all modern technology that was heavily warmed by the world-line traveling sun. Today, we dive into his story, his predictions, and all of the other details regarding the world's most famous time traveler, John Titor. Welcome back to Infinite Rabbit Hole. The future storyline. During the time frame that the internet was buzzing about a strange man who called himself John Titor and claimed to be a time traveler from the year 2036, the very same man would paint a story of a future that no current civilian in the United States of America would want to see come to fruition. This terrifying possible future of America began with the presidential election in the fall of 2004, and America's second civil war breaking out in the following year due to half of the population's disdain for the outcome of the controversial election and the first few acts of the new and never-named President of the United States. These acts would be directed strikes at liberties that Americans were accustomed to. The federal government would make the mistake in believing that the majority of the citizens of the United States would welcome security over their own freedoms. Due to this, many people moved out of the big cities and began new lives in the rural areas of the country where a small town living was adopted. By the year 2011, the new Civil War was in full swing and was so intense that Titor described it as being, quote, at everyone's doorstep, with events that were comparable to Waco happening frequently. The war was not between a specific region of the country against the other, as the first Civil War was. Rather, it was largely involving urban against rural areas, with the major issues being fought over being the immigration policies and the way the new administration was dealing with the southern border. To be clear, there were no mentions by Titor in respect to the political parties of the Republicans and Democrats as the two warring entities. He strictly stated that it was between cities and rural areas, and would even mention at one point that by his time in 2036, the Democrat and Republican parties faded away and were replaced by 10 separate new parties. During the next few years after the peak of the Second American Civil War, the entire world began to fall into a selfish rule of some of the most powerful countries on the planet. Then in 2015, Russia set off a series of surprise nuclear attacks on China, America, and various areas of Europe, an event that would be marked and referred to as End Day from that point on. This attack was triggered by Eastern encroachment by the Germans, with a few Western European countries backing their advances, and it was unclear if America was assisting in this movement. But the enemy that the Russians were looking to attack was not the general population of these areas. Rather, the enemy was attacking, at least in the United States, was what they called the quote-unquote American Federal Empire, a title given to the corrupt government that was causing so much turmoil not only within the borders of their own country, but worldwide. Russia was so careful and sought to complete their task without any real damage to the infrastructure of America. They even went out of their way to ensure that the nuclear weapons exploded close to the ground at their targets of the major metropolitan political powers of Washington, D.C. and Jacksonville, Florida, instead of the option of conducting what is called an airburst, which is considered much more dangerous and damaging than the alternative groundburst, due to the reverberation of the force off of the ground, multiplying the amplification of the area of damage and effectiveness of the electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, caused by the explosion. By doing so, Russia effectively crippled the corrupt and dangerous American government and allowed the civilians to reimagine and take control of the governance of their country. Although this act effectively ended the civil American conflict that was ongoing for the previous 10 years, it also effectively propelled the world into the Third World War, along with the intense Arab and Israeli conflict that was raging in the Middle East. For clarification, Titor did have rules against giving anybody information that would pull them away from their natural death in their world line, and the Jacksonville, Florida nuclear explosion was a slip-up that was uncharacteristic of Titor. The mention of Washington, D.C. would lead to many arguing that this is well known by anybody living in the area around the nation's capital, that they would be targeted naturally in such an event, so in that case, Titor wasn't going against his own rule. Then, in 2020, Congress would meet for the last time and completely remove the Constitution from the structure of America in an attempt to start over. In this start over, America drafted a new constitution that closely resembled the original but lacked many ways for the government to make changes to it without a very lengthy and difficult process, while resetting the standard that the original constitution was created for. It also lacked the likeness of being taken advantage of, as the current constitution commonly is, for political gain. There was mention by Titor that Americans still paid federal taxes, but no longer paid income tax, as it was added with the installment of the 16th Amendment, which was no longer an acceptable notion under the new Constitution. Although the 16th Amendment was clearly out in 2036, it is believed that the first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, was included, as there were subtle indirect mentions of their benefits by Titor in some of his posts and replies on a few different sources. But to be clear, this was not confirmed, and is only speculation regarding the clues in his post. From this point, the country began relying on their intercommunal trading rather than corporate megastores, a change that would become very important and quite successful. The United States split up into 5 general regions, all with their own president, with the capital of the United States being in Omaha, Nebraska. Power of legislation was left mostly to the individual counties in which people lived in, and became less powerful as you went up to the state level, and even less powerful when you went to the national and federal levels. This kept the power of governance closer to home for Americans. Speaking of states, the 50 current states still exist in Titor's world line and year of 2036, but they have been grouped and separated into 5 regions that mostly align to their own common concerns and economies. From this change, the office of the President of the United States was diluted from one person to a representative from each of the 5 regions. This was done to take power away from the executive branch and make top priority issues at the federal level a conversation rather than one person's decision. Where in his world line, the office of the President would accumulate power that was unheard of in modern times, which ultimately led to the unrest we discussed earlier in this chapter. In the year 2034, John Titor graduated from college at what was then called Fort UF, which is currently known as the University of Florida, on a scholarship earned through his time in the Florida militia known as the Fighting Diamondbacks. After his graduation, Titor was then recruited to the U.S. Army's 177th Temporal Recon Unit as a time traveler in training, with his first mission coming in 2036, in what would become the purpose of Titor's time in the years 2000 and 2001, when he was posting to the chat rooms and message boards across a few different websites. The reason for the trip to the past was to ultimately make his way to the year 1975 to retrieve a specific IBM computer that we break down more in the next section, that was to be used to rebuild the damaged portions of the internet infrastructure destroyed during End Day and the resulting World War III. John's mission. On January 27, 2001, a post appeared on Art Bell's PostToPost online message board, penned by a man calling himself John Titor. Just one in a series of posts to span across a little over 6 months and across many different online chat rooms and message boards that would send the community of Fortean fanatics and skeptics alike into a heated debate. This specific post reads, word for word, quote, "Greetings. I am a time traveler from the year 2036. I am on my way home after getting an IBM 5100 computer system from the year 1975. My time machine is a stationary mass, temporal displacement unit manufactured by General Electric. The unit is powered by 2 top-spin dual positive singularities that produce a standard offset Tipler sinusoid. I will be happy to post pictures of the unit." In an immediate response to his own post, the very next day of January 27th, 2001, John Titor would make mention that he finds it understandable that many of the readers and correspondences of the message board would find it hard to believe that he was a self-proclaimed quote-unquote time traveler from the year 2036. Even making mention that in his year, there are still plenty of people who believe that the concepts and the ability of time travel is a hoax. This is a post that we will dive into later in the presentation when we dissect many of the posts that Titor had made throughout his run as the internet's largest and most intriguing mystery. During this time, Titor would go on to make some very impressive statements that many who dispel the possibility that he was a time traveler would call quote-unquote lucky predictions that ultimately came true. Yet there were a few that did not, which many will argue that is not evidence against his legitimacy, since the concept of different timelines is a well-believed theory among physicists and specialists in similar or branching fields. We'll get more into the evidence for and against Titor in upcoming sections, but for now, we'll stick with the core of the Titor story and his mission. The core, or reasoning behind Titor's mission of time travel, would be the retrieval of the IBM 5100 system that a family member of his had access to. In September of 1975, the IBM 5100 was one of the world's first, quote-unquote, portable personal computers ever produced. It was this particular model that Titor claimed to be looking to retrieve due to its unique capability to emulate programs from both the BASIC, or Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, and APL programs, which stood simply for a programming language, as well as many other legacy code programs used by IBM. Essentially, this computer was able to not only use modern and common languages, but also had the capability to emulate and decipher old ones that were still being used by computers in the future that survived the EMP blast from the nuclear attack in 2015. These surviving computers were, of course, old systems that were scarcely locked away in people's basements, closets, barns, and attics, and were extremely rare. But one thing that was great about them is that they were just primitive enough to not be affected by an EMP if they were not plugged in to an electrical source. A fact that turned out to be 100% completely true, and a fact that very few people in the entire world even knew outside of the original engineers of the IBM 5100 system. According to the anonymous author of the book Conviction of a Time Traveler, there were only 12 people working on this system and paving the way for personal computers at IBM in Minnesota, which alone makes the fact that Titor knowing this information was absolutely incredible. The BASIC and APL programs are both computer programming languages that are the most widely used for programming languages by engineers and manufacturers of computer systems and are still used by professionals and hobbyists today. The BASIC system was used as the easy, quote-unquote, anybody-can-do-it system made entirely by using simple English-like keywords for commands, where APL is the much more advanced version, and as stated by Hackaday.com's article from December 23, 2023, titled Bringing APL to the Masses, the History of the IBM 5100, quote, is a multi-dimensional array-based language that uses a range of special graphic symbols, which appears cryptic and unfamiliar to those that are not fluent in its use. The purpose of using the APL system over BASIC was due to it being capable of excelling at concisely describing complex functions. Although the 5100 was not a commercial success, the hardware did achieve the goal of bringing an APL system to the average consumer, as well as the production and wide use of the IBM Palm processor, which according to the same article on Hackaday.com, quote, implemented an emulator in microcode to allow, example given, running System 360 APL code on a 5100 as well as BASIC. The definition of the action of emulating provided by geeksforgeeks.org's article from May 16, 2024, titled What is Emulation is, quote, the capacity of a computer program that stimulates the behavior of another program or system inside of an electrical device is known as emulation. They allow a computer called the host system to run software or use peripherals designed for another system, known as the guest system. The purpose of needing such a system was to use the BASIC and APL computer programming languages emulation capabilities of the IBM 5100 to prevent a Unix timeout in the year 2038. Unix is an operating system created in the very early 1970s that allows the user of the system to interact with the computer itself through the use of a CLI or command line interface. Unix is multi-user and multitasking and is still widely used today. There is a well-known issue with the Unix appropriately called the year 2038 problem, aka Y2038, aka Y2K38, and also aka the Epocalypse, and is well known amongst users today. Many computers measure time using the Unix system and is measured by way of a measurement of time since January 1st of 1970, a point in time known as the Unix epoch. According to this problem, some computers will stop representing time at 0, 3, 14, and 17 seconds coordinated universal time on January 19th of 2038 as the limit of its assigned 32-bit integer or data type. At this time, clocks will go back to the date December 13th, 1901 at 20:45 and 52 seconds. This is due to the data space of a 32-bit integer having the power to store 2 to the 32nd power of unique numbers. Doing the math, this comes out to a value of 4,294,967,296 different unique numbers. Dividing this number by the number of seconds in a year, which is 31,536,000, this will allow for a little over 136 years of storage in the sense of individual seconds. The Unix system uses a negative value that corresponds to a positive value, so that 136 years is actually divided by 2. a value of 68 years, and those values get added to the front end of the date of January 1st, 1970, and the back end, giving you the dates of January 19th, 2036, a little over the 68 years after the Unix epoch, and December 13th, 1901, a little over 68 years before the Unix epoch. This is, of course, not a real concern to modern-day technologies and can easily be fixed, but will be if there was such an EMP event to occur that knocks out all of modern technologies, essentially leaving us with no option but to go back to using 32-bit storage tech, which during Titor's 2036 America's entire infrastructure is run off of. One thing that was an incredibly interesting fact pointed out by the anonymous author of the book Conviction of a Time Traveler was that the IBM 5100 never had an internal clock system installed, making it invaluable to a civilization that was ready to have its entire infrastructure shut down because of a flaw in the Unix system of old 32-bit computers. The IBM 5100 was essentially Y2K 38 proof. On his way back to the year 2036 from 1975, John Titor stopped in the year 2000 to archive some data for use in the future. During his time in the year 2000, John would stay with his parents and young self in their home. There would be a few posts either discussing time paradoxes or answering questions about seeing and interacting with oneself while outside of your specific time, which according to Titor was 100% completely okay to interact in any way you wanted to. Titor's final post was in March of 2001. But the legacy of this amazing story of a possible time traveler from the year 2036 has become the pinnacle of urban legends and the lead example of how the declassification or reveal of the technology of time travel could be just around the corner. The post reads in its entirety. I will be leaving this storyline shortly, and this will be my final post. There are only a handful of people who will know exactly when I will be leaving, and I'm sure they will let you know when I'm gone. In the last few days, I have found your choice of topics quite interesting, and from an objective viewpoint, I think it collectively answers one of your own questions. If time travel is real, where are all the time travelers? In the past, I have stated that, quite frankly, you all scare the hell out of me, and I'm sure other temporal drivers would feel the same. But now, I have an expanded explanation with 2 examples. A while ago, on one of the posts, I related an experience I had with my parents while we were driving down a highway. Every now and then, we would pass someone who was in obvious distress with their vehicle. I was amazed that so many people would pass them by without stopping to help. Their explanation was fear. The risk of helping someone was too great, and with today's technology, they probably had a cell phone anyway. If they didn't, the walk to the gas station would be good for them, and teach them a lesson for running out of gas. The other example is the plight of the homeless. When you pass them as individuals on the street, I see the way people selectively choose an alternate path to avoid them. Those 2 examples best define why time travelers do not show themselves. In trying to help you, we put ourselves at great risk, and there's really no point to it. We know the nature of time dictates that traveling between exact world lines is impossible. Therefore, the only result we will see will be the ones we stay to see. Since world lines, outcomes, and events are infinite, we have better things to do. When I arrive in the new 1998 world line on my way home, I could easily start all of this again and continue to go through the same conversations with all the same people. However, I already know you won't pay any attention, or believe me, because we've already been through it on this world line. Besides, I think the walk to the gas station will do you some good. But one more interesting tidbit we will dive into more in a later section in 2009 when entertainment lawyer Larry Haber released a letter to the public provided by Titor's mother, Kay, penned by John Titor himself. In this letter, John outlines how there were 2 John Titors in our timeline at the same time, and that both were responsible for the posts that had the world's attention. One John Titor coming back from 1975 after retrieving the IBM 5100, and another from 2036 in attempts to answer a few questions he didn't have answers to the first time around. Since his last post, there have been numerous websites, videos, articles, and books that have been published attempting to either prove or disprove Titor's claims, as well as existing as sources for all of the archived Titor information. Incorrect predictions or things to come. Early in his spree of posting on Fortean or paranormal chat sites, Titor would make a few of the predictions that would ultimately not come true as time would tell. one of which was that in the year 2005, a civil war would break out in the United States between the urban and rural areas of the country due to the fallout of the previous year's presidential election and conflicts at the southern border. The Civil War would then break out into all-out war by the year 2008 and would be at every single American's doorstep, having what he described as a quote-unquote Waco-style event every month that steadily gets worse. The American federal empire of the major cities, which ruled laws and governance over all of the country, would eventually have the cities of Washington, D.C. and Jacksonville, Florida successfully nuked by Russia in what essentially ends the brief World War III, which essentially ends the Second Civil War, and the day in remembrance would forever be known as End Day. The historical fallout of such a war and use of nuclear weapons would see the United States splitting up to the rule of 5 separate regional presidents, with Omaha, Nebraska becoming the new U.S. capital. Each region is under its own rule and military mission. This, of course, never happened in our time flow. But if you look at the political landscape of today's modern United States, you will see a mirrored reflection of what Titor described happening in his prophecy. The rural red states are favorable to conservative ideals, and the population reflects that in the way that the majority of the population will vote. But yet the exact same can be said for the urban areas of the blue states and their liberal ideals. With tensions building with what seems to be every single day between people with differing thoughts on how they and society as a whole would live, I am left to wonder if Titor was right, and maybe we are just behind compared to his timeline. Titor specifically calls out the possibility of his predictions or prophecies not coming true when he says that they will, and combats it with the fact that his world line and our world line have what he refers to as a 2.5% divergence from each other. We will dive into the definition of this a bit more in a future chapter. But for now, many skeptics believe this is too easy of an out from Titor and claim that this alone proves him to be nothing more than a fraud and a hoaxer, while others point to his convenient rules or ethos involving not disclosing any information that would lead to someone's financial gain, cheat death, or drastically change anyone's future. Skeptics pointed to this as a surefire way of John Titor's proof of authenticity. Another prediction that we have not seen come to light as of yet is the effect of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, aka CJD, or the variant version known as VCJD. CJD is the human form of bovine spongiform encephalitis, or BSE, which is a rare and deadly neurological condition known as mad cow disease, which is brought on by aberrant or mutated proteins known as prions. The symptoms seen with BSE are non-normal behaviors, loss of coordination, behavioral issues, and death. The human version of CJD is what Titor warned us about, as he claimed that this was a very serious problem in his world line, and people were regularly dying in its grips. CJD can take months to years to incubate in a human host, and a person may not show signs or symptoms for some time, with a more precise answer not being able to be given with current studies. Some even claim that it could take decades for someone to show symptoms of this 100% fatal disease. So this is yet another prediction that Titor had mentioned that just may not have had enough time to incubate yet. Most of the world could potentially have this disease and not know it yet. Maybe Titor comes from a time where the incubation period is completing regularly.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Komm du noch?
If you used Babbel, you would. Babbel's conversation-based techniques teaches you useful words and phrases to get you speaking quickly about the things you actually talk about in the real world, with lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts and voiced by real native speakers. Babbel is like having a private tutor in your pocket. Start speaking with Babbel today. Get up to 55% off your Babbel subscription right now at babbel.com/Spotify, spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify. Rules and restrictions may apply.
The Everett-Wheeler model and divergence. There are many topics that we have covered in the tenure of the Infinite Rabbit Hole that have involved the concept of the possibility of multiple worlds, or some refer to as multiple universes or the multiverse. This particular model of existence is referred to as the Everett-Wheeler model and was first theorized by a physicist by the name of Hugh Everett III and his advisor, John Archibald Wheeler, in 1957 as a part of Everett's thesis for his PhD. The basics of this model was his explanation of the possibility of multiple worlds or universes that exist simultaneously, as well as exist in the same 4 dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis, as well as the 4th dimension of time, but hold different locations in the 5th and above dimensions. In the Everett-Wheeler model, every single branch in possible realities takes place at points that Everett refers to as an event. These events would create 2 simultaneously progressing worlds that move forward in time after their individual and different outcomes of their specific events. This simple mechanism would create an infinite amount of these event-created universes, which would ultimately mean that every single possibility being possible since the beginning of time existing simultaneously with our own reality. These branching events can be from multiple possible different types of events. One being the simple change from someone answering yes instead of no to someone else's request or favor. It also implies to the small subatomic events and their outcomes, such as how similar waves of energy, such as light, react in the concept of superposition in physics when they cross over the same physical position in time and space, or from simply being observed. The title given to the multiple universes would be referred to as world lines. It would come to be one of the biggest questions ever left unanswered by Titor. Did Titor's arrival into our world line create our own branch in the flow of time and world lines? In other words, did this event create a branch of reality that we exist in now and be the reason why we never had a second civil war breakout? Could he be the catalyst to our own experiences? And could there be another branch of reality where he never came and the legend of John Titor, the time traveler from 2036, is completely unknown? It was Titor's explanation of the concept of world lines that is why many do not believe that his predictions that did not come true mean anything at all, meaning that any false predictions by Titor does not mean that he was a hoaxer. Simply said, just because Titor told a story with certain events that never came true does not mean that he faked being a time traveler. According to the Everett-Wheeler model, our world line could have thousands or millions of different outcomes compared to Titor's, and therefore the evidence of what he got wrong means nothing. Rather, the more important information lies with what he got right. Correct predictions. For every incorrect prediction made by John Titor, there are plenty of correct predictions as well, some of them being extremely unlikely and huge in reference to importance. The first one that author Mike Sov points out in his book, Who Authored the John Titor Legend, is one that was originally asked on a chat forum by username Mike Kolznick on January 29th, 2001, with the simple question, what is the ginger invention? Titor's reply is just as simple. It looks like some sort of motorized scooter. What do you think it is? On the morning of December 3rd, 2001, the world would be introduced to the truth behind the Project Ginger codename. An inventor by the name of Dean Kamen would publicly announce his invention and company that shared the same name, known as Segway, on this day's edition of the Good Morning America morning television show. The machine, known as a Segway, is a vertical, motorized, personal transportation device with 2 large wheels and a self-balancing platform, which included a long stem coming from the platform to the rider's midsection, ending in a T-shape to allow for steering and control. The Segway looks very much like a scooter. This would be spoiled almost an entire year earlier when John Titor answered Kolznick's question. A famous debunker by the pseudonym Hoax Hunter would point to this particular example and many others like it as perfect proof that the entirety of the Titor story is a hoax. The claim that the people who asked such questions, such as Mike Kolznick, had zero or little internet presence outside of the posts in the forums regarding Titor, and even more specifically the post that Titor himself replied to. The argument has gone on to gain the title the Titor Confederacy, and is most skeptics' initial response to the Titor legend. Amongst these correct predictions, that some claim to be more of a prophecy, there is a laundry list of examples that a lot of people use as both claims that John Titor was a hoaxer and controlled the other usernames that answered his original post, as well as the people who believe that this is a story of a real time traveler. A few of these examples are the description of the internet system from 2036 looking like the modern-day cell phone system, which was not even close to being a thing that resembles today's system in 2001, The rise of influencers and the market for independent entertainment that some people will make their lives living off of, which seems like the world that YouTube has introduced to us all when it was released in February 2005 with a very primitive version of what it is today, and the birth of the profession of the influencer. The widely used term, the web, in his responses when referring to the internet that author Mike Sov claims wasn't widely used until the year 2016, but the term was first coined by the English computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee while he was working at the highly conspiratorial research company CERN in Geneva, Switzerland in 1989 with the use of the three-letter acronym www that is placed before every website on the internet that stands for World Wide Web. CERN, a French acronym for the European Organization of Nuclear Research, has been ground zero for many different highly debated topics involving fringe sciences and hypothetical physics since its establishment in 1954, but the slang term web was not widespread practice being used until at least the mid-2010s. A reference to the militia in his time's Florida that he joined in 2011 at the age of 13 called the Fighting Diamondbacks, and the general military's love of a poem by the title of A Soldier's Winter. At the time of the mention of this poem in 2001, there was no poem registered with such a title. But in 2005, a retired colonel of the Department of Defense by the name of Larry Cluck would publish such a poem which reads, "The day before it wasn't snowing, after amber made our earth now glowing. The trees are strangers, leering, disapproving. In the ash of winter, our minds are now moving. My world, my life, my wandering path, it seems not God, but man's own wrath. I pray God's eyes may see us again, gaze upon us at our end. We will rebuild, we will renew, from a world of greed and lust that left so few. Remind me that I am still his child, and prove us with your mercy mild." When asked to provide the lyrics of this poem he regarded so highly in a post questioned in 2001, John Titor replied, "A soldier's winter. The day before it wasn't snowing, the trees are strangers leering, disapproving in the ash of winter. My world, my life, my wandering path. I pray God's eyes may once again gaze upon me and remind me that I am still his child." Quote, "I only think I remember the first line, but the last one I remember, it has quite a few more lines that I don't remember. It was rumored that this was written first as a letter by a soldier. After he had died, it was added to and edited by others. In my opinion, it has become a symbol for the collective guilt my parents' generation feels for what became of the world." Titor had made mention in one of his posts about the composition of his time machine, referred to by the title of a CTAC-204 gravity distortion unit, and how it worked. He told of how the machine housed two miniature black holes to allow the machine to manipulate time using Einstein's theory of general relativity, and that the black holes themselves were manufactured by CERN. In a post very close to his departure, Titor had mentioned that CERN would announce their ability to manufacture such black holes in the fall of 2001. This ended up not being true, as CERN did not finish their Large Hadron Collider, or LHC, until 2008. With an issue arising with a magnet just 9 days later, keeping the LHC down until about a year after that. But here is one of the very many supposed lies that Titor purposely told in order to protect the true story and the future work done with time travel. In the book, Conviction of a Time Traveler, the anonymous author explains that Titor may have purposely lied when saying that CERN was behind the manufacturing of the Kerr singularities used in the C204. It was the author's theory that the real manufacturers came from right here in the United States at the Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, or RHIC, in Upton, New York. The RHIC began operations after its commissioning in the year 2000 and specializes as the only collider in the world that can produce polarized ions, which leaves the ion's electron cloud distorted from an external electrical field. Mix this with the fact that the company that produces the C204 in the future, General Electric, had many contracts with the RHIC in the early 2000s and continues to have many more today. Who was John Titor? There have been many possible names thrown around as the true identity of the person hoaxing under the name John Titor, or his now famous username, timetravel_0. In his book, Who Authored the John Titor Legend, author Mike Sov mentions 6 people, starting with the trio of brothers Larry, Richard, and Maury Haber, as well as Joseph Matheny, Oliver Williams, and a mysterious author/poster by the pseudonym Temporal Recon. Larry Haber is an entertainment lawyer from Orlando, Florida, who is officially listed as a lawyer for the pseudonym K. Titor, a fictitious name used in place of John Titor's mother's real name. Larry Haber is also the now CEO of the John Titor Foundation, LLC. The foundation holds the rights to the once shared insignia of the 177th Temporal Recon Unit that John Titor claimed to have served with under the future military. The John Titor Foundation also operates the official John Titor Foundation website and has also published the book John Titor, A Time Traveler's Tale, which now sells for a minimum of $400 everywhere you look, and is quite literally a 108-plus page book documenting every single post and reaction by John Titor. I've even seen it for as high as $1,000 for a used copy on eBay. Larry Haber has appeared on multiple venues, including the world-famous Coast to Coast AM radio show with George Norrie and Fade to Black with Jimmy Church, as the middleman between the radio host and Titor's mother, Kay. Kay has never appeared publicly, and many people believe her to be completely fictitious, which helps the arguments of skeptics that believe Larry Haber to be John Titor himself for financial gains. But there is one major flaw in this theory. Larry Haber is a very successful entertainment lawyer who has regular clientele from both Disney and Universal Studios, among many others in the Orlando, Florida general area. He does not need to represent a possible fictitious character for financial gain. He is already well known and wealthy due to his enormous client list. After releasing his payment records, it also goes to show that K. Titor and anyone else under the Titor umbrella that claims to be directly related to the time traveler appears minimally in comparison to the other Titanic names. But why is he so involved in the ownership of such a foundation then? He simply says that he is a fan of the legend. The account of K. Titor fell into his lap by accident, and he knew absolutely nothing about the story before her initial contact. Everything he knows came directly from the family, and he cannot claim that he believes everything that they say, or what he has said in a public forum. But one thing he can guarantee is that the family believes it 100%, which all may be true as well. The funding records for the John Titor Foundation is dismal, and there is not anything really being made there either, at least in comparison to his practice, which leads many to believe that if he was doing this for financial gains, then, quote, he must be the worst entertainment lawyer in the entire world, as mentioned by author Mike Soff. Larry Haber was also the man responsible for releasing the famous letter penned to the world by John Titor himself, titled John Titor Letter 177, Tempus Edax Rerum, Latin for time that devours all things, and is also the slogan used by the 177th Temporal Recon Unit. This famous letter was directly given to Haber by K. Titor and produced into a video on YouTube read by an automated voice. I have included the transcript in a later section when the contents will make more sense. The only thing posted on the official John Titor website is a set of charts, each with 6 entries. There are a few different theories behind these charts. Some include this being a log of important posts that other Titors may need in order to find their way home. Each chart has 3 columns in addition to the 6 rows of entries. The first column is a date, the second seems to be the divergence value, and the third is sparsely filled out with what looks to be notes about the post in reference. Richard and Maury Haber. Larry Haber's 2 brothers are also common perps on the book as possibly being one of or the John Titor. Maury is an IT administrator and is very well versed in the subjects of technology, which makes him a prime suspect to have the knowledge that most of the public did not have regarding the IBM 5100 capabilities. This theory has Larry playing his brother's lawyer and the other brother Richard as being a protector as well, possibly creating fake posts and random chat boards to create a divergence away from his brother. This would also explain the letter that Titor released explaining that there were in fact 2 John Titors making posts in 2001. The previously mentioned hoax hunter had also uncovered that the P.O. Box 47071, used for the John Titor Foundation is under the name Larry Haber, but was previously under the name John R. Haber, a fake name that does not exist in this Haber family and shares the same first name with the mysterious John Titor. But the middle initial R in the fake name is claimed by many to stand for Richard, the brother who is behind the entire hoax put on by the 3 siblings. Joseph Matheny. A tech worker since 1993, Joseph Matheny is pointed to by many as the most probable real John Titor. Once working at big tech companies like Adobe and Netscape, Matheny is the primary authority behind the internet's first ever alternate reality game, Ong's Hat. Visiting his descriptions listed on the sites he is active on leaves you a bit uncomfortable, as the man clearly sees himself as another worldly being. The intro listed in Mike Sov's book, who authored the John Titor legend, has his self-description listed as, quote, Joseph Matheny, a pseudonym for a plethora of evolutionary intelligence agents throughout the galaxy, like Monty Katzim, Luther Blissett, or Saint Germain. You never know who or when he's going to pop up. He is rumored to never sleep, moonlight as a technology consultant, daylight as a fireproof vampire, and live by the motto, non serviam, and also never failed to leave a ticking time bomb behind. A lot of people who do not believe that Matheny is the real John Titor claim that he is just a simplistic nerd who uses big words and a sadly small collection of go-to terms to make himself look important to his legion of other nerds who looks to him for approval. But there is some juice behind the theory. He could very well be John Titor. In the 1980s game, Ong's Hat, that became most popular in 2001, there is a book that outlines the science behind time travel. In fact, the entire game series is based around the paranormal, conspiracy, cult, and pseudoscience genres. But it is in the time travel book on Ong's Hat that Matheny is the author of that the connections between Titor and Matheny begin to really shine through. Then there is the fact that Joseph Matheny has come out publicly to be one of the 4 men he claims are responsible for the entirety of the John Titor mystery. He would even call into Coast to Coast AM and ask questions to the website editor of the John Titor story by the name of Oliver Williams, who appeared on the show to talk about the topic of time travel and John Titor. Matheny would always appear on the caller line under the name Josh during every time travel episode he could. He played a troll whose purpose was to have fun at the interviewee's expense. Matheny would eventually reach out to the previously mentioned Larry Haber, the entertainment lawyer from Orlando, Florida, who published a book that now goes for over $300 on almost every website you look at, titled John Titor, A Time Traveler's Tale. He would threaten to expose Larry as a fraud, and is quoted in Mike Sov's book as telling Haber, quote, "You're talking to John Titor, motherfucker," and that he would go public with, quote, "What a fucking fraud you are." Matheny claims that 2 days after his phone call to Larry Haber, the book was no longer listed as in print on Amazon. Haber claims that this is bogus and that he has never been in contact with a man by the name of Matheny, nor has he been in contact with anyone claiming to be the real John Titor who threatened him. His story for the book being out of print is due to the request of the Titor family. Temporal Recon. Temporal Recon is a pseudonym used by a mysterious person who has authored an entire book on how the John Titor story could very well be true. The name of the book is Conviction of a Time Traveler and is listed as having an anonymous author. The book is presented in a scholarly approach and is very well written. I bought it myself after author Mike Sov talked about it in his book. I will dive into more of the information outlined in Temporal Recon's book throughout this presentation. But for now, the simplest way to look at Temporal Recon as a possibility is that he has extended knowledge of many different aspects of the John Titor mystery that many do not have. He is able to talk on a level of Titor on the subjects of time travel and hypothetical technologies, and he also talks in a similar tone and connotation that the Titor post did as well. Besides that, in a deep dive we will do into his book, there are those that believe that Temporal Recon and the previously mentioned Joseph Matheny are one and the same person as well, which seems to be one of the favorite theories amongst the community. Oliver Williams. Oliver Williams is the owner of JohnTitor.com and is a literal encyclopedia of knowledge on the subject of Titor. Also is the leader in sales of John Titor merchandise, which would give him all the reason in the world to hoax being a time traveler. His website was receiving a minimum of 10,000 clicks a day in 2013, and the revenue he made from advertisement and sales of knickknacks could well support his endeavors. Marlon Pullman. There is one other name that people will throw around as a possible Titor. That would be Marlon Pullman, and in 2011, Pullman applied for a patent based on the schematic and drawings of Titor's GE manufactured time machines manual that Titor had posted at one point. Something to know about Pullman is that he held the title of Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance Products Strategy for a very reputable software company, as well as authoring 4 textbooks on the subjects of Oracle Identity Management and LDAP, or Light Directory Access Protocol, both of which are systems used for categorizing, controlling, accessing, and managing user identities in a variety of system softwares. Cutting to the chase, the man is smart, with the assumption by skeptics that he is a crank and a stupid man trying to make $1 off of someone else's false schematics not being worth any weight, as if Pullman believed there was some validity to these schematics, and seeing that he has a vast knowledge and professionalism in the world of software and technology, it's safe to say that he submitted for the patent because he believed it worked. The abstract of the patent provided in Mike Soft's book, Who Authored the John Titor Legend, reads, quote, "A method for employing sinusoidal oscillations of electrical bombardment on the surface of one Kerr-type singularity in close proximity to a second Kerr-type singularity, in such a method to take advantage of the lens-Thirring effect to simulate the effect of 2-point masses on nearly radial orbits in 2+1 dimensional anti-de-Sitter space, resulting in creation of circular time-like geodesics, conforming to the Van Stockum under the Van den Broek modification of the Alcubierre geometry permitting topology, change from one space-like boundary to the other in accordance with Gauch's theorem, which results in a method for the formation of Goebel-type geodetically complete space-time envelopes with closed time-like curves." Okay, now the fun part. Let's break this down with a few definitions of key terms. Sinusoidal is the term defining the form of a sine wave, common in many forms of mathematics and commonly used in the measurements of oscillations, or the movement back and forward at a regular speed. Have you ever seen a heart rate monitor? The lines on the green colored screen in a hospital room show a line representing the rate of the heartbeat in the form of a line that curves up and down. This is an oscillation, and the form of that line is a sinusoidal oscillation. A Kerr-type singularity is the defining term of the gravitational singularity causing the black hole, when the next key term to follow is the lens-Thirring effect, which represents the act of dragging, or how a body's mass affects the surrounding space-time and its gravitational force. This is what you see when you see a depiction of a grid-like pattern and a sphere moving around in a circular simulating rotation of a planet in space. This is called frame dragging. The next defined term we need to understand are what he refers to as anti-de-Sitter space, which is essentially space between two gravitational forces or coordinate patches that stands as a systematically constant space of time in the vaguest sense. This is a stack of space-time disks, each representing space-time at a specific point. When combining these first 3 concepts that I have outlined, you get what is referred to as the Van Stockton dust, which is literal dust that orbits in a vacuum. Think black hole, which generates a gravitational field on an axis of symmetry in the shape of a circle. Immediately, we are followed by the mention of how the Van Stockton reference on the frame dragging being caused by the sine waves given off of the oscillation of gravitational forces from the twin black holes, causing a modification to the Alcubierre geometry, which is reference to the Alcubierre drive concept, proposing the effects of such acts on space-time in the vacuum of space. This would ultimately change the shape of the topography on the gravitational grid seen in many concepts of space-time effects, such as the examples that I have provided. This would then result in the next key term mentioned, Gauch's theorem, which is a theory referencing the shape of the effect on space-time and how to properly dust for the narrowing and curvature of said space-time. This altogether creates a Gödel-type pocket of space for the safe travel of space by way of the use of 2 synchronized black holes. I know that was a lot of big terms, but I hope that helps. On the surface, this sounds like a very smart man who understands theoretical physics. But in reality, these steps outlined in his patent request were literally stolen directly from Post, made by Titor himself. None of these theories at the time were proven, and still are not to this day. The physics and the math are all there, and bearing any inputted data that we have not yet identified in the decades of physics we have outlined so far, these should hold up well and eventually be proven one day. Now, as a side note, I do want to just take a quick second to mention the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. A hypothesis is when somebody says, hey, I think that this is the way something works. A theory is when there is a ton of evidence behind something that leads the scientific community to believe that this is true. They just don't have the exact pieces that they need to prove it. So, going back to some of the old episodes of The Infinite Rabbit Hole, I just want to mention things like the stoned ape theory and the aquatic ape theory. Those are actually not theories. Those are hypotheses. They should be mentioned as the aquatic ape hypothesis and the stoned ape hypothesis, but the term theory has been added by people who do not quite understand the definitions of that term to create a more catchy title, if you will. But really, they're just hypotheses. Now, these that we just talked about here in this section, these are theories. There is a lot of really, really, really good evidence behind them, and one day, we are expected for them to be proven to be true. Now back to John Titor. Ultimately, the story of Pullman has a tragic ending. On October 12, 2013, he pleaded guilty to attempted second-degree assault, unlawful possession of the drugs ecstasy and ketamine, as well as drugging and abusing multiple women. There are many flaws in the theory of Pullman being the real Titor, enough for me to not list him in the quote-unquote possibilities section we just covered. Eventually, a musical test would be given to him by a Pamela Moore, who we will talk about later in this presentation, that would eliminate him as Titor. Pullman would also actively state he was not John Titor and never claimed to be. The two men thought differently, wrote their sentences with different dialects or patterns, specialized in different and varying fields of science and technology as well. Pullman was good at copying and pasting smart words from Titor's posts, but never could explain them in layman's terms for the average person. He was smart. He wrote a lot of good code and technological properties for the company he worked for, Oracle. But his expertise in software code and tech does not translate to theoretical physics. He was a man who knew very elementary info on these topics and saw a way to patent something he desperately wanted to be real due to fandom. Honestly, I could have skipped this entire part in the story of John Titor, but I saw it was an incredible opportunity to explain the theoretical physics outlined by Titor in his post to prove that even though many believe that he was a fraud and a hoaxer, John Titor was an extremely smart and well-educated man in topics that were not anywhere near common knowledge, even for the physicist of 1998 to 2001. The General Electric C204 Gravity Distortion Unit. John Titor mentions in one post that there were, quote, about 10 units like mine, C204, and 20 larger units known as the C206. The General Electric C204 Gravity Distortion Unit was manufactured in the year 2034 and was roughly the size of a footlocker and weighed approximately 500 pounds. In a post from January 27, 2001, Titor describes his machine further, quote, a stationary mass, temporal displacement unit manufactured by General Electric. The unit is powered by two topspin dual positive singularities that produce a standard offset Tipler sinusoid. The anonymous author of the book Conviction of a Time Traveler does a nice job at listing the major components described in various Titor posts. 1. Magnetic housing for two microsingularities. 2. An electron ejection manifold to hold the gravity and mass for microsingularities. 3. A cooling and X-ray venting system. 4. Gravity sensors. 5. 4 cesium atomic clocks. And 6. 3 computer units. One particular necessity for the use of the C204 and C206 was that there was a need for a vessel to be used in order to allow for the safe travel of a person through time and world lines. Titor famously used a 1967 Chevrolet to travel to 1975, as it was meant to not draw attention and blend in with other vehicles on the road at the time. Then, when he traveled to the year 2000, he sold the Chevy and purchased what he only describes as an all-wheel drive vehicle to get back home in. This would of course mean that there is a 1967 Chevy somewhere in the United States from a completely different world line, and the person who owns it no doubt has a lot of pride in their beloved Chevy, but most likely has zero clue that it was not made in the reality that it is currently in. The way it would work is that instead of driving at a certain speed like in the Back to the Future series, the vehicle that held the C-204 would have to remain still during the time traveling process. As explained in the previous section, during operation, two singularities would create two separate event horizons that would intersect and create the pathway needed to travel among world lines. An event horizon referring to the boundary around a black hole that stands as a border where no light could ever escape from. There are many mentions of this and its gravitational effects on time distortion in Einstein's theory of general relativity. As soon as the event horizons reveal themselves around the singularity or black holes in the C-204, these singularities then become what are known as Kerr singularities, which are rotating black holes theorized to be created by the collapsing and rotation of stars. These are easily identified by the presence of the ergosphere and phenomenon of frame dragging, or visual distortions created by the gravitational pull. Roy C. Kerr was a New Zealand-born mathematician that discovered there was multiple types of black holes or singularities. The title of a Kerr black hole or singularity was adopted for the ones that Kerr himself discovered, which rotated and created a strange ring-like effect now known as an event horizon, unlike the then standard stationary ones. In addition, the area between the event horizon was then referred to as an ergosphere. It is from the event horizon that the C-204 would find the power and capability to travel for its intended purpose by overlapping the ergospheres, which creates a sinusoid or sine wave shape of gravitational fluctuation and magnification between the two singularities. There is an absolutely beautiful picture on the internet that was provided by Titor as proof to this effect on a handheld laser. To allow the laser to be seen by the naked eye, you can see Titor blowing smoke from his cigar into the pathway of the laser while seated in the 1967 Chevy. The technology is best seen in the patch of the 177th Temporal Recon Unit, where you can clearly see two paths of matter represented by parallel black lines, with one of them narrowly escaping the oval representing the singularity and its surrounding gravitational field, and another being engulfed into the singularity itself. The technology used in these world line travels was commonly referred to by John Titor as gravitational distortion machines rather than the common term used by enthusiasts, time machine. In fact, whenever Titor used the term time machine, he would always put quotations around it in order to emphasize the difference. He would explain multiple times that it wasn't necessarily time travel by the standard definition, as it was gravitational manipulation that allowed him to travel to and from world lines and through their individual time flows. Piloting. Another popular question that was often asked was, what did it feel or look like when traveling through time? This, Titor explained, began with the machine warming up to 100% ready, which took a bit of time. When ready, which was signaled by an audible alarm and small lights, the pilot would experience about 2 G's worth of force on his or her body. When looking out of the window of the Chevy, Titor explained that it looked as if the car was accelerating with great speeds. This was an illusion, of course, as the car in the C-204 did not move during the act of travel. Rather, it was the image of time being bent around the car that made it look as if it were moving fast. When the machine was at full power and in the process of transversing world lines and time, the affected area would be drowned in a temporal flood of ultraviolet light. This is why the pilot was given a pair of sunglasses or goggles to wear during transport. But there were some pilots that chose to close their eyes during transportation instead of using the provided eyewear. After the period of ultraviolet light, the immediate area was bathed in darkness for the remainder of the flight. There was also a bottle of oxygen provided with every flight. Although the act of gravitational displacement did trap oxygen in the air with the pilot, it often was not enough to safely travel for the length the flight would take. In the case of John Titor being transported to the year 1975, a travel of 61 years, the one-way trip would take 6 hours based on the C-204's 10-year-per-hour speed limit. These longer trips often left the pilot needing additional ways to breathe. Once all of the oxygen trapped by the displacement unit was used up, this became an emergency component of travel, as even the short flights could have something go wrong. From an observer's point of view, the takeoff and return of the pilot and the machine happens fairly seamlessly. The gravitational displacement unit creates a distortion around the car due to the manipulation of gravity by the dual singularities. This would commonly look like small heat distortions mixed with small electrostatic shock discharges, but then it would fade and all that would be left is the machine and the pilot, which came back from the trip to a split second before they even left. This would be seen as seamless and as if the pilot never left to those that watched it happen. The only real giveaway from the outside looking in that anything happened is that the ground where the displacement unit returned from would be present, as the unit commonly brought about an inch of ground with it when it left due to gravitational field size. Titor had used a term more than once in his posts and replies that deserves a bit more explanation. The term we are talking about is divergence. In the layman's definition, to diverge is to go another direction from a standard path or direction. You can literally apply this definition to the term of divergence used commonly by Titor as a way to measure one's world line's difference in comparison to his own world line. This is an important value to a hypothetical time traveler, as it would be a value assigned to a separate world line's difference that Titor had embarked from. Due to changes being made at every single intersection of decision or happenstance made in the history of all the world lines in existence, there are bound to be some that are just too different to even be eligible to visit. This, of course, could be deadly if a time traveler were to travel to an Earth that was 90% carbon monoxide, or to a section in space that no longer or never housed the Earth at all. So, Titor explains that in order to visit a world line with the possibility of having what it was he was looking for, he needed to stay in worlds that held a divergence value as close to zero as possible. Divergence was also used for his explanation of how the future that he lives in may not be the future that we live in. Just because Russia set off nuclear weapons in Washington, D.C. and Jacksonville in his world line does not mean that they will in our world line. Many skeptics saw this as a far too easy answer for a hoaxer to get out of their false predictions, but this has a ton of real implications to issues that a time traveler would have if his technology ever did or does exist. As we will discuss slightly later in this chapter, divergence was a value that was monitored in the time machine that Titor used to travel to different points in other world lines. As the anonymous author of the book, Conviction of a Time Traveler, the first credible investigation of John Titor explains, quote, "Before activating the machine and embarking on his trip through time, the operator must calibrate the C204 to the local gravity. This local gravity is recorded by the machine, and while the machine is activated, it continues to measure the local gravity in pulses. While the machine is engaged and the traveler is traveling through time, if a major change in the gravity signature at the site takes place, the machine then backtracks to a time when the distortion in the gravity signature did not exist." Titor would explain that due to the problem of divergence values, regulation was made to limit travel through time or world lines to a maximum of 60 years. Anything after that was considered to be too dangerous due to the high probability of never finding a suitable world line to visit. This was questioned by more than one keen-eyed researcher throughout the last few decades, as it is well known that Titor claimed to have come from the year 2036 and traveled to the year 1975. This would be a total of 61 years. There was never any mention as to why he was able to do this or what the divergence level was when he arrived in the year 1975, but when he was on his way back after acquiring the IBM 5100, he did stop in the year 2000 for a personal task that allowed him to mingle among the chat rooms and message boards of the internet of the time, where he claimed that the world line and time that he was in held a 2.5 divergence value to his own world line, which, if you think about it, creates a rather large gap for potential differences between our world line and his. But of course, this was also discussed by Titor, and it is mostly those that are just discovering his mystery that look at this as a possible flaw in the story. The multiple world theory created a plethora of different issues for the study of time travel or gravitational manipulation. It was the exact issue of divergence that was discovered during the first test of the C204 prototype, which became apparent when they sent the machine on its first test flight and it never returned to the testing location. The initial thoughts were that it was lost and never coming back, until the machine was discovered a few miles away and destroyed by what looked to be falling damage from a high altitude. This sent scientists involved into a frenzy of theories on what could have gone wrong, but the answer was simple. The machine that they were testing was a type of time machine. not a space machine. It would travel through world lines in the exact location it was at when it began its test flight. But the problem is that the Earth is a body that moves through space. So due to its orbit, which chases the sun, which is on its own long orbit around the Milky Way, and through universal expansion, when the time machine came back, it went to the exact location in space that it left from, which was then in the sky a few miles away. Titor explains that the hardest part of the future scientists to figure out wasn't the concept of traveling time using the dual singularity model we discussed, but rather it was the issue of plotting a safe course to a specific location in time-space. The answer to this problem was the invention of the variable gravity lock, or VGL, which was a component that took multiple reoccurring snapshots of its surrounding gravitational fields. By doing this, the machine could make minute adjustments to its physical location to ensure that it traveled with the Earth and appeared where it was when it left on any world line. The secondary capability that used the exact same technology in the VGL was the ability to recognize slight changes in gravity while traveling through world lines. When gravitational difference between the targeted world line and its home world line was too far off of the variance allowed, it would automatically kick you back to the last accepted world line with an allowed amount of gravitational allowance to prevent you from appearing in a brick wall or in an ocean that was created on a world line that varies greatly from ours, or even worse, in space. When the VGL detected a gravitational difference outside of its allowed values and returned you to a world line with an allowed value, you were then able to recalibrate to a new targeted world line and repeat the process. This process was referred to by Titor as the process of backtracking.
AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts, it knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief, and it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI, it's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
Possible origins. One thing that has been brought up on multiple occasions by multiple sources on multiple platforms is that the John Titor story has many parallels with many different sources of pop culture. The first of which is the connection to the movie series Back to the Future, where the time machine being used is a DeLorean DMC-12, a car that I would personally love to own one day for the simple fact that it is such a popular model among time travel enthusiasts. Whereas in the John Titor legend, Titor mentions using a 1967 Chevrolet as his vessel of traveling through time streams. The connection here is pretty much limited to the fact that the vessel being used for the act of time travel is a car. But many people point to this fact that the real Titor, whoever they may be, used this as an influence in his decision on choosing a machine to travel in. The next example of possible influences on the story came directly from Mike Sov's book, who authored the John Titor legend, in which he shows a shocking connection between the Titor Post and the 1959 post-nuclear apocalyptic novel by Pat Frank, Alas, Babylon. Published at the height of the Cold War, Pat Frank's historical piece of work bears many parallels, including the setting being in the state of Florida, the use of the fateful day being referred to as H-Day, where Titor uses the term N-Day, and as referenced in response on a post in May 1st, 2001, Titor outlines another striking similarity in reference to how his family survived the after effects of a struggling population in a nuclear fallout Florida. Quote, "The family work we did was picking, sorting, and shipping oranges by sailboat up and down the coast of Florida. We were expected to produce a certain amount for the community and a certain amount for other communities as agreed to by our CLC. In exchange, we received power, water, and a certain amount of food, and other necessities that were produced inside of our community." This statement also strikes parallels to the famous book, as the protagonist, Randy Bragg, lived on a citrus farm in Florida and inspired his friends and community to launch a seagoing vessel in search of preserving salts from a nearby island. There are also a lot of references to community engagement in response to the catastrophe in the form of sharing goods and services that are also echoed in many Titor responses. As a side note, I found this to be extremely interesting and wanted to find out more for myself. So I headed over to Amazon and purchased a copy of the paperback for a little over $7 thanks to the Black Friday sale going on at the time, and let me mention, this was a great piece of literature, and Mike Sov was 100% correct in drawing a few shocking similarities between Titor's story and this book. But my argument here is that the similarities seem to be more or less common thought in similar situations. In the state of Florida, and in the case that you hold residence near the water, a common form of transportation without the use of vehicles that became useless from the nuclear electromagnetic pulse would be to use sailboats as free energy forms of transportation, and the connection between oranges and the two stories should come to no shock at all, trust me. I lived in Florida from the ages of 15 to 24, and I can safely say that the citrus plants grow there and that this would not be a fact worth denying the authenticity of the Titor story in my mind. Great book, nonetheless, though. Then there is the connection to the storyline used in the Dungeons & Dragons-like game, GURPS Underworld, specifically added in the form of a variant campaign by the username Spearweasel in the early 90s, in which the story involves chaos ensuing in the year 2004, which results in martial law and a suspension of the U.S. Constitution. In the years 2005 through 2007, the Second Civil War broke out, killing 2 million civilians, and in 2015, the Third World War, with major team-ups between Japan and Russia, as well as China and the US, resulted in the usage of small nuclear strikes on Alaska, Europe, and China. And the John Titor story, Civil Unrest, begins at the end of the presidential election in the US in 2004, with the resulting Second Civil War breaking out in 2005. The year and the war are the same in both sources. The end year is different, where Titor doesn't necessarily ever directly mention an end to the Civil War. He does mention how it slowly fused into the third short-lived World War 2015, which is the same year that is mentioned as the genesis of the World War III in Spearweasel's variant campaign of GURPS Cyberworld. Timeline. There is a timeline in the legend of John Titor that, once known, makes a lot of the posts and mentions of certain events understandable and even more digestible once you become comfortable with the idea of there being two separate Titors visiting this timeline who communicated with the public on the web. 1975. This is the year that Titor is going to gain control of the IBM 5100 personal computer that is owned by one of his family members, who would later, in Titor's post, turn out to be his grandfather, in order to bring back to the year 2036 to eliminate the timeout of the Unix system by using the emulation capabilities of the computer's BASIC and APL code systems. From here, he jumps to the year 2000. 1998. John Titor is born. When Titor arrives here, his job retrieving the IBM 5100 is complete. The newborn John Titor only has to survive to the year 2036 to allow the time flow to stay as consistent as possible with very little variation. This is when the two faxes were sent to Coast AM radio show with Art Bell. More on this very soon, no worries. Within the two faxes, a man claiming to be John Titor mentions the invention of time travel in the year 2034 and the fallout of Y2K. 2000. Titor stops in the year 2000 on his way back to 2036 from his time in 1975, where he obtained the IBM 5100 computer. This is when he creates his usernames and website to discuss his travels in paranormal and time travel enthusiast websites. He stops here specifically to gather artifacts needed before finishing his home stretch back to his home year in 2036. 2011. This is the year that Titor is drafted into the Civil War and joins the Fighting Diamondbacks militia in Florida. There is no time travel aspect to this year, but many get caught up in this year and confused since Titor mentions it multiple times in various posts and responses. 2015. Again, there is no time travel aspect to this year as well. This is the beginning of the brief World War III and the year of the nuclear attacks that took place in Jacksonville, Florida and Washington, D.C. that caused the country to break up into 5 separate regions with 5 separate presidents, with the new capital of the U.S. moving to Omaha, Nebraska. 2036A. During the first mention of 2036, Titor is set back to time to retrieve the IBM 5100 from the year 1975 for its various debugging capabilities to clear issues with programming and systems used in the future. 2036B. Titor succeeds in his retrieval of the IBM 5100 and returns safely back to the year 2036. Now, there is an alternative theory on the timeline, which does not involve two John Titors. This would be a timeline that follows the path from 2036 to 1975 to retrieve the IBM 5100 and promise his grandfather that by giving him the computer, he would ensure his children's safety to future catastrophes. Of course, this would turn out to be Titor's mother or father, as well as his aunts and or uncles. Titor and his grandfather would travel to Rochester, Minnesota, where the IBM 5100 was being manufactured before returning to Florida to travel world lines again. From 1975 to 1998, where he would stop for a period of time to allow the divergence to decrease and allow for a more suitable time for travel to reveal itself. This would also be when the first fax is sent to Coast AM, and he would decide that he was to stop in the year 2000 to help his family with their post-Y2K issues. Again, more on Coast AM coming up very soon. From 1998 to 2000, where he would meet with his family and explain to them the future that lies in front of them, fulfilling the promise made to his grandfather, but was surprised to see that there was no major Y2K event as there was in his world line. In 2001, he would travel back to 1998 in order to once again wait for an opportunity to return to a world line as close to his original as possible. While in his second trip to 1998, Titor would then author another fax to the Coast AM radio show without mention of Y2K, as he discovered that the catastrophe of a flash global freezing never occurred in the world lines that shared a low divergence rating with the one he was in. Side note, it was made clear that Titor understood that he would never be able to return to his original world line. With the near infinite world lines in existence, the probability of finding a way back to his would never happen. But he could find one that had a close enough divergence rating that it would feel like he made it back to his home world line. From 1998, he would travel back to a world line close enough to his original for him to feel like he was back at home. But many people will point to the website JohnTitorFoundation.com as proof that the two Titor storyline is the real one out of the two, since the website was set up by the family lawyer and clearly mentions two John Titors, each with their own tables, dates, and what seems to be divergence ratings. Now that we have that cleared up, we can safely talk about how important the Coast to Coast AM radio show was to the unfolding of the John Titor legend. In 1998, Coast to Coast AM received two faxes from a man by the name of John Titor, who claimed to have been a time traveler from the year 2036. I believe the best way to discuss the contents of these lengthy faxes is to read them out in their completion. The first fax was sent on July 29th, 1998, and reads, quote, "Dear Art, I had to send a fax when I heard other time travelers calling from any time beyond 2500 AD. Please let me explain. Time travel was invented in 2034. The breakthrough of successful research on fusion reactors allowed scientists at CERN to create the world's first singularity-powered time machine. The basic concept involves rotating the singularity within a magnetic field. By altering the speed and direction of the rotation, you can travel both forward and backwards in time. Time itself can be understood in terms of connected lines. When you travel back in time, you travel along your original timeline. When you travel off of the singularity engine, a new timeline is created because you and your time machine are now there. In other words, a new universe is created. To return to the original trajectory, you must travel back a fraction of a second and immediately restart the engine without turning it off. Some interesting results of this are: 1. You meet yourself. I have done so often, even bringing a younger version of myself for certain things before returning to my timeline. 2. You can alter the history of the new universe you have just created. Most of the time, the changes are imperceptible. Sometimes, I notice non-existent car models or books released late. The oldest was a skyscraper that hadn't been built near one of my favorite stores in New York. It is interesting to note that when you time travel, you have to compensate for Earth's orbit. Since the time machine doesn't move, you have to adjust the engines to remain on the planet when you turn it off. Unfortunately, it has also been discovered that anyone who has traveled forward in time from my 2036 encounters a barrier in the year 2564. Anyone who has been there reported that nothing exists. When the machine is off, you find yourself surrounded by darkness and silence. Now, most time travelers are trying to figure out where the line went wrong by going back to the past, creating a new universe, and moving forward to see if the same thing occurs in 2564. It seems that the line went wrong around the year 2000. I am here now, in this period, to test some of my theories before moving forward. Now, here is some future information you may want to know. 1. Y2K is a disaster. Many people die on highways when they freeze to death while trying to reach a milder climate. 2. The government tries to maintain power by implementing martial law, but everything collapses when their efforts to restore electricity fails. 3. A power plant in Denver is able to restart, but it is attacked by hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed. This further convinces us that perhaps we shouldn't restore the old system. 4. A few years later, a new system of government is developed after the Constitution undergoes some twists. China takes back Taiwan, Israel wins the greatest battle of their lives, and Russia is covered in nuclear snow due to their reactors exploding. Art, the reason I am here now is that I believe a nuclear weapon launched by Iraq in the Middle Eastern War with Israel may have something to do with the damaged timeline. I will test that theory and get back to you. Please pray that we discover why there seems to be no apparent future beyond 2564. We obviously never suffer through a winter as extreme as Titor explains in this Facts in the Wake of Y2K, but we have already explained how timelines work and how this could be different in each. The second thing I would like to point out is that the mention of a missing skyscraper in New York City. Could this be in reference to the Twin Towers and the 9/11 attack? If so, it would be a reference from the year 1998. Now, for the second fact, which is a bit smaller. I am a time traveler. I have been in this world since April of this year, and my plan is to leave soon. Normally, time travelers do not actively influence the timeline they visit. However, this mission has been prolonged for a long time, and I have become attached to some of the people I have encountered here. For personal reasons, I have decided to assist this timeline by sharing future information with a few individuals, hoping that it may help their future. I am contacting you for the same reason. Unfortunately, there is no historical reference to your program on my world line. I believe you could change your future by creating one now. Some of the information presented in your program can be valuable to researchers. I suggest selecting episodes that focus on military technology and new theories of physics. Transcribe these programs and keep them in a safe place. I recommend a location in the Midwest. I also urge you to reconsider your paranoia towards the Russians. They are not preparing for war with the average American citizen. They are preparing for war with the United States government. In the end, they will save this country and the lives of millions of Americans. I understand that my request may be difficult to accept, so I will send the following once I know you have received this fax. A few pages from the operations manual of my time machine, and a few colored photographs of my vehicle. If you wish to contact me, I will be happy to share with you the nature of time, the physics of time travel, and some of the events of the future. There really is not much of importance in this fax other than a few mentions of recommendations. The only real eye-opener is the mention of how the country of Russia is not an enemy to the typical United States citizen and how their quarrel is with the governing bodies. He even mentions that Russia will free people of our tyrannical government's grasp, ultimately saving many lives. Although there may not be much in the second fact, the combination of the two being a part of the Coast to Coast AM program was humongous for the story of John Titor, as this was by far one of the absolute most famous popular shows on the airwaves in the late 90s. A radio show that was not only heard here in the US, but found its way to many countries around the world. But even more importantly, there were a few different lines that people could call into on the show, the most famous being the East of the Rockies and West of the Rockies lines, with another being for new callers and yet another being specifically set aside for time travelers. So to say that the program was popular among time travelers and fanatics of the concept is an understatement. Before moving on to the next chapter, I think this is a great place to read off the transcript from the YouTube video that I mentioned earlier that was posted by the family lawyer Larry Huber, as it will make much more sense now and will help explain the previously outlined timeline of events, which included 2 John Titors. Greetings. I am the man you know as John Titor. Correction, I am one of the men you know as John. In 1999, I was the second to arrive on the same world line as the other man you know as John. It was I who wrote the post in November and January. When I return to 2001, I will write for the final time in March. My mother will release this message to you in November of 2009. The other John Titor wrote the post in December and February. He too will write his final post in March of 2001. As I write this now, the date is March 22nd, 2009, and the divergence is 1.941. This is not the first time I have been in your future. I was here before writing the first post in 2001. I tried to warn you. I tried to wake you. As time passes, I fear you will witness the transition from your apathy and dependence to your children's fall into bondage. I feel sorry for you. You will not know the peace and freedom I will have when I return home. In spite of my efforts, the war that gave that gift to me may come to you much later. To prove to you who I am, a friend will corroborate the significance of the musical group, the B-52s. I am sorry about the strife and difficulty you have had these past years. It was required. As I said, after 1975, when I arrived in 1999, there was already another John there. The two of us devised a plan to return to separate world lines. The plan required that each of us travel to different time periods between 1998 and 2009 and take measurements with our displacement machine. We had to find a way to communicate these measurements in a way that would last and could be easily found later. Our first attempt was with the fax to Art Bell. I traveled to 1998 first and left the first fax with Art. The other John traveled there later and was able to find my fax. He then left the second fax. As the plan is now progressing, we are able to use the internet. The post we made and will make a foundation we will need to get home. And each month, we will post the measurements we had made in various time periods on different world lines. Every time someone posts about John Titor after 2001, they will become more permanent and easier for me or another John to find. If the other John or even another John ever arrives in your future trying to get home, he will now see the numbers he needs in the posts. If he were to hear this message, he will know what to do. The final measurements are on the website my mother's attorney has overseen. This is the reason we made the post. With your help, they will last. They are a signpost to other Johns who are lost and need our work to return home. For this, I must thank all of you. 177, Tempest, Edex, Rerum, Time will devour all things. For clarification, this is not a post that has been verified as coming from the same John Titor in which the post on various chat rooms and message boards appeared during the years 2000 and 2001. This is strictly Larry Haber claiming to have produced this video letter for John Titor. Pamela and the Hoax Hunter. Pamela Moore is known as the one person who John Titor had a very close relationship with during his spree of postings on forums. Pamela would frequent both the PostToPost and Time Travel Institute's message boards where their conversations have been archived by many enthusiasts and preserved. She was also one of the select few that communicated with John via instant messenger and was the one person on record who sustained the lengthiest conversation recorded with Titor's username. During the connection, Pamela was given a specific song by Titor that she could use to determine if anyone claiming to be Titor was really him or not. She has never released the title of the song and claims to be keeping it to herself until she hears it from someone claiming to be Titor himself. She also has the only piece of physical evidence ever provided by Titor in the form of a label from an IBM 5110. It arrived in a package with no return address but had a postage from the city of Orlando, Florida. Many people will mention that the label of the IBM 5110 came from the one he secured in 1975, but the truth is that he never mentioned that it was from the particular one. It also came from the 5110, not from a 5100. It is possible it is, says Moore. But it wasn't what she requested when he asked what he could send to her as a gift. The following quote comes from a conversation between Pamela Moore and the famous debunker known as the Hoax Hunter. First of all, the label from the IBM, it is not necessarily the label from the IBM he went after. He asked me what I would like from him, and I told him I wanted something that traveled through the black hole with him, even if it was a small piece of paper. He chose to send me this label. It was never meant to prove John was a time traveler. He never mentioned that it came from the computer he was supposed to get. It was simply an item that went through the black hole with him. That's it. And if this was true, then the very label itself was made up of atoms from another world line. Back then, That was very exciting to me. Later on, she would share a piece of the label with a man by the name of Phil Fjord, who would sell the piece successfully on eBay in 2015 for a sum of $10,000. The hoax hunter is exactly what his name entails. According to author Mike Sov, he is a man who targets hoaxes and creates compelling pieces of work against what he believes to be false claims. One such claim that he battled was the entirety of the John Titor story. The hoax hunter was the one to break the news about the John Titor Foundation's P.O. Box, which was once under the ownership of Larry Haver's brother and was gone to great lengths to prove that 88 of the names that interacted with Titor on various websites were planted by Titor himself and were not actual people. He first found it strange that as soon as someone would post a question on these websites, it would be mere minutes before a very thought out and detailed response would be posted from the username of Titor's. This could only be possible under two circumstances. Titor was watching all website boards at the same time at all times, or he was ready for the question, as in that he was the one posting the question under fake names. The hoax hunter discovered that these 88 names disappeared from the internet's Google results once Titor did, and that there was very little, if any, activity outside of the message boards that Titor frequented by any of these 88 usernames. It is his actual prediction that there are only 13 usernames that can say for certain that were not Titor and have healthy histories on the internet before and after the Titor timeframe. They also were frequently posting on non-time travel websites, which showed that they were human beings that were also interested in more than just one subject, as normal humans are. This, I believe, is extremely good detective work by the hoax hunter, but is it the final answer? Further info. On the surface, the epic that is the John Titor story looks like a blatant fraud and easily debunked as the product of a hoaxer. But if you have just a little bit of extended knowledge on a few key subjects, it is easy to see that this man was an absolutely brilliant person by today's standards and was privy to information that was not readily available in the years of 2000 and 2001. And we are just seeing some of the deeper info buried in his posts coming to fruition in recent times, with even more of his explanations or predictions looking like they are also ready to become reality. As I do with all of my research, I have left bits of information out that the original researcher or author would get 100% of the credit for. And in the case of John Titor, I highly recommend the book Conviction of a Time Traveler by an anonymous author. Mike Sov, the author of the book who authored the John Titor legend, claims to have found out who this anonymous author is and even interviewed them. Their pseudonym was Temporal Recon, as we had talked about before. But this book by this anonymous author is truly amazing, and one of the few books I have even given a 5-star rating to. In this book, they outline a few deep dives into the reason why Russia nuked America and what the reasoning behind the use of the atomic clocks in the C204 actually are. Hint, it's not for timekeeping. The matter of the book can get really technical, but the author does it in a slow and detailed way that ensures you follow along to what he is trying to explain, as well as uses many high-level sources for his arguments and evidence. The way that this author approaches some of the obvious and not so obvious points in the John Titor legend is incredible. One example was how in chapter 23 he dives into the question, why did John Titor mention anything about the IBM 5100 in the chat rooms? It is a great question. His story is incredible as it is and has many believable parts. Why give up critical information about a crucial piece of technology? This is a question that I have not seen pop up in any of my other sources for my research into this topic, yet it seems like a very elementary and simple yet important question to ask. This anonymous author believes that Titor simply did this to plant a critical piece of information in the public, but not so public view for the near future scientists to have immediate access to. In the meantime, saving tens of years of research into possible life and infrastructure saving options, especially since the 5100 was not advertised to have such language capabilities or that it lacked an internal clock. It truly is a brilliant thought when you think about the potential amount of time it could have taken for an engineer or scientist from the future to discover the need for this specific device. This simple task was even more impressive when he explains that the production of the 5100 was made obsolete a mere 3 years later in 1978 when IBM released the 5110 with absolutely none of the important capabilities that engineers from the future would need in order to save countless lives. This, he claims, would be the reason why he would have to travel to 1975 to get his hands on a 5100 instead of trying to go back to a closer date and find one from a collector or in some unknown storage facility somewhere. In 1975, he was able to not only have access to the time that the computer was in production and readily available for the most part, but he also was able to enlist the assistance of his grandfather, who had immediate capabilities to obtain one. So again, who was John Titor? The same anonymous author that we have been talking about this entire presentation had one more very important discovery up his sleeve at the end of the second section in his book, Conviction of a Time Traveler. This was the possible or even probable identity of Titor's grandfather, a man by the name of Philip Donald Estridge, who led another 11 computer engineers in the creation and manufacturing of the IBM 5100 personal computer in the mid-early 1970s. Looking further into Estridge's history, we find a few other striking similarities. Estridge was born in Jacksonville, Florida, a common city mentioned in the legend of John Titor and on more than one occasion by himself. He also attended the University of Florida, another prominent feature in the future details provided by Titor as a hub of post-nuclear civilization. He would graduate from the University of Florida in 1959 with a degree in electrical engineering and would go on to be contracted for intense work by the U.S. Army, NASA, and of course IBM, as well as being offered a multi-million-dollar position by Apple CEO Steve Jobs at one point in his professional life. An even deeper layer to the story, essentially with the question asked earlier, why go back to 1975 instead of making a shorter trip to a closer year? Philip Donald Estridge and his wife, Mary Ann, were killed in the crash of Delta Airlines Flight 191 in Dallas-Fort Worth in August of 1985. Although this doesn't answer why he didn't go to any of the time between 75 and 85, when combined with the possible answer earlier, the reason to jump to 1975 becomes clearer. But then again, many of the events that Titor had claimed would happen seemed to have happened years later than it did in Titor's world line. Could Estridge have passed earlier in Titor's world line? And maybe that is why he went so far back. Or could it have been a simple need for as much time as possible in case it became difficult to find the machine or find a world line to go back with a small enough deviation? Skeptics and the flaws they find.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
It's football season, and you can now get almost anything you need for game day delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a running back delivered, but you can get baby back ribs delivered. A strong defense? No. A strong deodorant? Yes. A 6-pack of abs? Nope. 6-pack of beer? Yes. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats, official on-demand food delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Alcohol 21 plus and in select cities. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
There are a ton of reasons why someone would believe that the legend of John Titor holds weight and is a true account of an actual time traveler, but there are some flaws that skeptics cling to in their defense of their opinions of John Titor being a hoaxer. The two big points, or mispredictions, that skeptics cling to are the failed arrival of the wars that he talked about, both the Second American Civil War and World War III, as well as one other that was not war-related, and that was the 2004 Olympic Games, would be the last in the world's history. The reality is that all three of these events all stem from one event, and whether or not it comes to fruition. In Titor's 2004, the country was beginning to fall apart due to the outcome of the presidential election and the resulting governing of the administration. In 2005, the Second American Civil War moves into a reality and is due to this event and the warring of the Middle East and growing strains between Russia and European countries that the 2008 Olympics never comes to fruition, as mentioned in Titor's post from January 29th, 2001. Quote, "As a result of the many conflicts, there are no official Olympics after 2004. Then in 2015, World War III begins in response to the nuclear warheads used against China, various areas of Europe, and the United States by Russia. These are all separated by skeptics as separate events, but the reality is that it all stems from the presidential election, which we are never told the outcome of by Titor. But there is a very good deduction made in who the particular president could be that was the driving force between the cities and rural areas of the country in the anonymous author's book, Conviction of a Time Traveler, that I will not talk about here, as this was some truly impressive work and this author should have full credit. Just keep in mind that this book was written in 2010, and there have been multiple events that have happened since that I believe strengthens his opinion he makes near the end of the book. But even before that, there was an increase in restrictions on the rights of American citizens, leaving the country upset before the election even takes place. So none of this would happen if there was peace in America prior to the end of the 2004 election. Of course, there were tensions between Russia and Germany that were discussed, but some would say that there is plenty of evidence in Titor's post to show that this would not have been an issue if the conflict in the Middle East didn't take place. So the true origin event that never happened in our world line in comparison to Titor's may have been whatever truly happened in the Middle East prior to 2004. We have heavily discussed the concept of world line deviation ratings. The rating between ours and Titor's was mentioned to be 2.5%. Looking at all of the differences that there could potentially be in the infinite amount of world lines, why would it be so hard to believe that whatever this event in the Middle East was, it never occurred to kick off these particular events mentioned by Titor, or at least not yet. But what if the event that sets off the specific chain of events that we just went over wasn't the conflict in the Middle East? There were many different posts that one could look through for clues to what may have actually happened. And one possibility did happen on our world line, but it would seem that it happens later than it did in Titor's, and hadn't happened yet when he was here in the years 2000 and 2001. In one of the faxes sent to the Coast to Coast AM radio show, there was mention of a skyscraper absent in the New York City skyline. Quote, "You can alter history in the new universe that you have just created. Most of the time, the changes are subtle. The oldest one was a skyscraper that don't exist in New York City." It is difficult to say whether or not he meant this statement as a nod to his own world line or the one that he was in the year 1998. But the anonymous author of the book Conviction of a Time Traveler makes yet another impressive conclusion in that the building he was talking about most likely had to either be the Empire State Building or the World Trade Center. His deduction made by the fact that you could go to anyone in almost the entire world and ask them to name a skyscraper in New York City or identify a silhouette of one, and many would point to the Empire State Building as their answer. It is extremely recognizable. But since our World Line's terrorist attack on September 11th, 2001, the World Trade Center's Twin Towers has become the most recognizable symbol that is no longer present in the New York City skyline. Imagine if in Titor's world line, these behemoths are already gone in the year 1998. We still do not know exactly when they were destroyed, but the simple fact that they were still there in the spring 2001 when he went back in 1998 and sent his fax to Coast AM with these exact words is a clue to a possible enormous piece of this complicated puzzle. Then there was this post in February 25th in the year 2001. Quote, "None of the things I have said will be a surprise. They were set in motion 10, 20, even 30 years ago. So, we really do not have a single clue how far behind Titor's world line we could potentially be. This could stand as the solid proof that we are doomed to repeat the same fate at Titor's timeline, but simply have not reached certain pivotal events yet. And there is more evidence in other postings as well, when you look at them in connection with the above statement about the skyscraper. The next specific example comes in the form of John's second rule when discussing events with people on the message boards and chat rooms. I have listed them all for remembrance, but it is specifically the second rule that we are most interested in for this part of the argument. 1. I will not disclose any information that will cause someone to personally gain by its knowledge. This means no stock or sports tips. 2. I will not disclose any detailed information that would allow someone to avoid death by probability. This means no earthquake or bombing information. And 3. I will not disclose any information that may compromise any future actions by individual people or threaten their family and well-being. Our anonymous author once again points out that there is a specific mention of a bombing in a time and country that never really had any experience with bombings except for the February 13th, 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center carried out by Al-Qaeda and the Oklahoma City bombing by Timothy McVeigh on April 19th, 1995. Even though we have a few examples of successful bombing attempts, our corner of the world has, for the most part, remained safe from the threat of bombings in comparison to the areas, especially the Middle East and select areas of Africa. So why mention bombings in particular? There is a chance that the anonymous author could be looking too far at this particular example, but I can see their point as well. For example, maybe Titor's Twin Towers were destroyed by a bomber, and not by planes, as ours were. To him, this could be a very important piece of information, or it could be a general description of a dangerous effect, especially since the very rule that it is mentioned in is about not disclosing certain details, which is what I personally believe and is one of the very few things I would make a slight argument against the anonymous author with. In another post in this argument, a response posted by Titor on November 4th, 2000, where he makes a statement that hints at the slight differences between the two worlds. Quote, I've also noticed little things like news events that happen at different times, football games won by other teams, things like that. But why? Why not just tell us of this seemingly important information if in the end, the score of the game may change anyway? Well, it seems that it all came down to John Titor not wanting to change our future. Believe it or not, he saw it necessary for the United States to go through the Second Civil War and the nuclear attacks by Russia, as seen in these next two responses from February 12, 2001 and February 5, 2001, respectively. Quote, the animal kingdom is alive, and I'm sure it suffered, but there are fewer people infringing on the animal's habitat now. Nuclear war is a very undesirable thing, but it is not the end of the world. There are areas of the cities we can't enter. The environment did suffer a great deal of damage, but we are recovering. Isn't Hiroshima a thriving city today? The major physical effects included skin cancer, infertility infection, and etc. Almost everyone has some sort of physical remnant from the war. In a second post, quote, I think the war would be good for you and your society. I don't want to stop it. Well, this subject captured my interest like very few other subjects ever did. The amount of evidence that John Titor was actually a time traveler or world line traveler, if using Titor's nomenclature, is astounding. So this is where I will leave you. This report is far from complete, and there are many other aspects of the John Titor story to highlight and dissect. But I feel like the parts we did cover were some of the more important areas of the legend to understand. The truth is that the John Titor legend may never be confirmed, but it is one of the few aspects of the unknown that may one day prove to be true. And I believe that this alone is one of the most intriguing details of the story. It could simply not be finished. John Titor, or whoever he may actually be, may once again visit us, or we may just catch up to our own world line's John Titor and be the ones sending him back to the year 1975.
Future
know the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.